Okay, story Moses. All right. So we're going to be spending a little bit of time in Exodus this morning. The book of Genesis actually outlines the thread of redemption through the Abrahamic line. So we have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob becomes sons who become the 12 tribes of Israel. So we see that Abraham's story really is Genesis chapters 12 through 20, Isaac in 21 through 26, and then Jacob in chapters 27 through 35. We find that the balance of the book of Genesis talks pretty extensively about his sons, beginning in Genesis chapter 36 and 37. And then the story of Joseph. And really, when we talk about Moses, we have to understand the set and setting of why Moses is a significant character. Why does the story of Moses even matter? And really, we first have to understand how the Hebrews, how the Israelites even ended up in Egypt to begin with. And that story begins with Joseph, or really that relationship that the Hebrews have with Egypt begins with Joseph. So we see in Genesis chapter 39, which I'll turn to. That Joseph, so his brothers, Joseph was beloved of his father, Jacob's favorite son, essentially, and was given a coat of many colors. And his brothers envied him not just for the fact that their father had such love for him, but also for the fact that Joseph had this esteemed quality about him. He had some dreams that he conveyed to his brothers, and in those dreams, essentially, he uh, dreamt that they would pay obscene, I can't even say it, that they would obey him and that they would reference him. And um, they really didn't like that. And so basically, they conspire and stick him in a hole, and he is sold into slavery and sold into slavery into Egypt. He comes to a house of one of the captains of the Pharaoh, and becomes a great man, becomes a great steward of the household, and um, he's essentially ensnared. He's accused of wrongdoing because the captain's wife tries to force herself on him, and when he refuses her advances, she essentially catches him by the coat. And when he runs away, she uses that coat as evidence that he had assaulted her, and he is imprisoned. And that is Genesis chapter 39. I will read that beginning in verse 7. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master, what if not what is with me in the house? And he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Very important language that Joseph chooses there. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Taking the premise all the way to the top, rather than how can I sin against my master, but how can I sin against God? Um, there's a lot to unpack there in terms of the importance of marriage and the marital bond, but suffice it to say, it rises to the highest levels. Verse 10 of Genesis 39, and it came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her, to lie by her or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men in the house there within, I should say. And she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. And then verse 20, and Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. And the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him in that which he did, and the Lord made it to prosper. This continues. Joseph's arc continues in the same vein till eventually he is governor of Egypt. He is second only to Pharaoh, and his words carry the weight of Pharaoh. And so Joseph becomes this great man, and as Genesis continues, basically the story is that there's this great famine. Joseph prepares for the famine. Pardon me. He prepares for the famine. The famine is going to be 7 years long. A couple years into it, and this is not just in Egypt, but all around Egypt as well. There's just no food production. And because of this great famine, and because Joseph has prepared for this great famine, Egypt has food, which means wealth is flowing into Egypt as the surrounding nations and peoples look to Egypt to shore them up during this time of trial and famine. Jacob and his other sons are among those groups. And Jacob sends his sons to Egypt to buy grain, and they go, and Joseph recognizes them. They do not recognize him. And Joseph is very clever here because he can speak Hebrew. He can also speak Egyptian. And he uses a translator to speak to his brothers. And his brothers will confer amongst each other in Hebrew, and they don't realize that Joseph can understand them. And so he lays a couple of really clever traps. The first one of the first ones is he, of course, he gives them grain, and without them knowing, they of course purchase grain, and without them knowing, he takes the money that they use to buy the grain and puts it back in their grain sacks. And they don't discover that until they're already on their way home, and they discover that the money is in the grain. They presume that they have stolen the grain, which would be a big problem. And so they go back to Egypt, and there's a lot of this back and forth till eventually Joseph reveals himself, and it's a very inspiring scene of a family reunion. Once his brothers realize who he is, they weep. Everybody's weeping and crying, and the family is eventually restored in Egypt because even Pharaoh, when Pharaoh hears that Joseph's brothers are come, he is delighted and invites them in. And so basically the whole family, Jacob and everybody, moves into Egypt. And that's at the bequest of Joseph, of course, and of Pharaoh himself. So, when we get into the Pharaoh that we know of Moses, the tyrant, this Pharaoh was very different. So the Pharaoh, Joseph's Pharaoh, was a generous man. He was delighted. That's Genesis chapter 45 and verse 16. And I'll read through 20. And the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brethren are come. And it pleased Pharaoh well and his servants. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Say unto your brethren, This do ye, lay your beasts, and go, get you into the land of Canaan. And take your father and your households, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and ye shall eat the fat of the land. Now thou art commanded, this do ye, take your wagons out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come, and regard not your stuff, for the good of all the land of Egypt is yours. Markedly different from the Pharaoh that we think of whenever we're talking about Moses, whenever we talk about Pharaoh today. This Pharaoh issued a command and basically said, quick, get out of the land of Canaan. That's where they were, of course. There's a lot of symmetry and poetry that's going on in Genesis and Exodus, as we'll see. But essentially, Pharaoh's like, forget all your stuff. We will take care of you. You will have the best of the land. You will be loved. You will be provided for. And so they do that. Well, good morning.
I thought you weren't here this week.
No. We leave we leave on Tuesday.
Oh, well, let me get my Bible and I'll be right back.
Okay.
See, we thought you were gone this Sunday and next Sunday.
No. It basically I won't be able to teach any of the
I've been
Sundays
in
until
clean. Okay, I'll be right back.
Okay. Okay. Well, sorry to surprise you this morning.
I was like throwing stuff in the recycle bin and I'm like, oh, the lights are on.
Yep.
I don't think I left them on last night, but you know.
No, that's okay. I thought, well, I can go ahead and.
Yeah, we thought you were gone this Sunday and next Sunday because you said the last Sunday of June.
Oh, I guess that would be this Sunday, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's where we.
That's on me. That's poor communication on my part. So.
we'll just have to verify the dates that you're on.
Yeah, no, that's on me. Too many things swirling around in life. So,
Oh yes. Yeah.
Well, today is the story of Moses. So I was just kind of walking through, setting the scene. So we are going to be in the tail end of Genesis. Basically, the relationship that the Hebrews have with the Egyptians begins with Joseph. So you have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob becomes Israel. His name is changed, and it has to do with he wrestles with an angel throughout all the evening. And the way that the Bible describes it is he wrestles with God until his hip is disjointed. And Jacob holds on to the angel until he receives a blessing. And so that is Genesis chapter 32, verse 24. And it says, And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let you go, except that you bless me. And he said unto him, What is his name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince thou hast power with God and with man, and hast prevailed. The name Israel means to wrestle with God. And so the blessing is that his name is changed from Jacob to he who wrestles with God. And the story of the Israelites has that connotation. And we've talked a little bit before about how the relationship that God has with man is really more akin to like a marriage. There's this push-pull discussion. rapport type of thing. And um, there's wrestling involved in that. I mean, you're married. Sometimes there's a little bit of a friction, a little bit of a clash, but it's from friction you can build fire.
It's one of those opposites attract type of thing. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah,
no one is the same. I mean, if you're the same, you're not,
you're not going to grow.
right.
Yeah,
You
and
have
so
to have differences and
exactly, and so that's the idea.
Yeah.
Right, is that man wrestles with God, and in so doing is further refined, and that is the blessing inherent in that name, that you are now Israel. Okay, so Jacob has 12 sons. He has 12 sons with a few different women, and his favorite son is Joseph. So the story of Jacob is basically he fell in love with Rachel and worked hard to earn her hand in marriage. Ended up marrying her sister. They had a few kids, and then her sister had a handmaid, which Jacob had a couple of kids with, and then he finally earned marrying Rachel, had 2 sons with Rachel, and then had a few more sons with her handmaid. So there's like 4 different women. Yeah. Yeah. So there's like 4 different women that Jacob has sons with. And these sons are the 12 tribes of Israel. So Rachel gave birth to Benjamin and Joseph. She died when she gave birth to Benjamin. And so his like beloved wife that he spent many, many years trying to earn her hand ends up dying. So Joseph is one of her sons. Joseph and Benjamin are like legitimate brothers. And all the other brothers are like half brothers. Surprise!
Yeah.
No, I did not communicate very well, so that's on me. But we're talking about Moses this morning. So anyway, because Joseph was born of Rachel, Joseph becomes Jacob's favorite son. The other brothers don't like that. They become very jealous of not only the fact that their father has such affection for Joseph, but he also gives Joseph good gifts, and that inspires jealousy among the brothers. And they eventually, one of the gifts is a coat of many colors, and they desire the coat. There's actually a play called Joseph and the Technicolor Coat of Colors. Anyway, it's a good one. So all it is to say, Joseph has a couple of dreams where he tells his brothers these dreams, and the dreams are basically like, hey, in the dream, you pay homage to me. Like, I'm the brother that you look up to. So he tells them a couple of these dreams, and they're like, all right, we got to deal with this guy. So they put him in a hole, and they leave him there. And he is captured by or discovered, really, by slave traders. And they sell him into slavery into Egypt. So he ends up working for a man who's a captain of the Pharaoh's guard, and becomes a great man in his house. He's a great steward. Basically, this man leaves everything to Joseph. He runs his whole house. Well, his wife, the master's wife, tries to sleep with Joseph, and Joseph refuses. And she eventually, one day, basically nobody else is home except for Joseph and this wife, and she tries to force herself on him, and Joseph runs away. And in the process of running away, she grabs his coat, and not the coat of many colors, but a different coat, grabs his coat, and he runs off. And she keeps the coat, and then when the men come home, she then spins this story that he tried to force himself on her, and so he's in prison. In the prison, he also becomes a great steward, so much so that the guard of the prison just tells Joseph to run the show and take care of all the prisoners and make sure that they do all the things that they need to do. So once again, Joseph is running the prison. And that arc continues till eventually he is the governor of Egypt. So Pharaoh makes him second in command. His weight actually carries the weight of Pharaoh. And Joseph understands that there is going to be a famine. This famine is going to be 7 years long. And in the due course of preparing for the famine, he sets up storehouses of grain and all this other stuff to basically have enough supply to last for a 7-year famine, which to provide for a country for 7 years and have enough to sell to other countries, because that's what happens, is everybody around Egypt comes to Egypt for food. And so all this wealth is flowing into Egypt because they're the only ones with any food. Well, about a couple years into the famine, Jacob, who's in the land of Canaan with his other sons, they need food, so he sends his sons to Egypt to buy grain. When they get to Egypt, they do not recognize Joseph as the provisioner of grain. They have to appeal directly to the governor to get approval to buy the grain. Well, he uses an Egyptian translator to talk to them, even though he can understand Hebrew. And so the brothers will talk amongst themselves in Hebrew, and they don't understand that Joseph can understand them. And so he starts to play games with them and sets a couple of traps for his brothers, just to poke. Well, I'm sure there's a little bit of revenge to it, right? But it's a very brotherly story. So basically, they buy grain. They're approved to buy grain. Joseph takes their money that they bought it with and puts it in their grain sacks without them knowing. So on the way back to Canaan, they discover that their money is in the grain sacks, and they freak out because they think that they've somehow stolen grain from Egypt, which would be a big no-no. So once they get back home, they come back to Egypt to basically be like, hey, we didn't know, this was an honest mistake. And there's a couple of back and forths till eventually Joseph reveals who he is. And it's like a very emotional family reunion type of thing. And it's so emotional that Pharaoh hears about Joseph's brothers. And Pharaoh issues a command and basically tells them, you're commanded to leave the land of Canaan, go and get your father, get your stuff, come to the land of Egypt. You are very welcome here, and you'll eat of the fat of the land, is what the Pharaoh tells them. So very different Pharaoh than what we're going to see that Moses had to deal with. This Pharaoh was very welcoming, and so the whole family moves into Egypt. And that's how the Hebrews end up in Egypt. And they're there for 430 years before Moses draws them out in the Exodus. So to set the scene, how do they end up in Egypt to begin with? That's how. There's a great famine. Whole family moves down to Egypt. They're there for a few centuries. And that's how the book of Exodus starts out, is that there's a new Pharaoh that comes along, and he does not like the Hebrews. Because at this point, after hundreds of years, the population of the Hebrews actually outnumbers the population of the Egyptians. And they're afraid that if the Hebrews so wanted to rise up, they could essentially take control of the nation. Okay. So, and this may sound familiar, when this Pharaoh comes in, and basically the way that the account in Exodus reads, and this is Exodus 1 verse 8, now there arose a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, behold, the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And he issues a decree later in chapter 1 that basically says any male baby of the Hebrews kill. They don't have hospitals back then, but they had midwives. So the midwives were instructed to kill any male children. And Moses, he comes into play in Exodus chapter 2. He's born in the house of Levi, or to the tribe of Levi. And his mother fashions a basket of reeds and places Moses as a baby inside and presumably puts him on the Nile. It says here, it doesn't use the word Nile, it just says river. But generally speaking, when a river is referenced in Egypt, it's almost all the time talking about the Nile. So he's put in this basket. This is Exodus chapter 2, verse 3 and 4. And when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein. And she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. And then the rest of that chapter, or the next several verses, basically talks about how the daughter of Pharaoh finds him and orders a nurse to take care of him. That nurse is his biological mom. So Moses gets to be raised reared by his mother, but in Pharaoh's house, which makes him essentially royalty. So he is, as he gets older, and through some context clues in Acts and in Hebrews, we understand that he's about 40 years old when this happens. But in Exodus chapter 2, verse 11, and it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens. And he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. Again, the Hebrews are slaves at this point. And so he sees what seems to be a slave master or labor taskmaster, whatever you want to call him, beating a Hebrew. And verse 12, and he looked this way and that way, and when he saw there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So he murders the Egyptian. Verse 13, and when he went out the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together, and he said unto him that did the wrong, wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? And he said, who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killest the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian. And he sat down by a well. Now the priests of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. So basically, they're at the well, and some other shepherds drive these daughters away. Moses stands up and rebukes them and helps them water their flock. They return home and tell their father what had happened. And their father's like, and you didn't bring him over for dinner? Like, this man helped you and watered our flock, and you just left him there at the well? And so they go and get Moses. Moses dines with them, and the priest of Midian gives his daughter Zipporah to be Moses' wife. So this is Exodus 2, verses 21 and 22. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses Zipporah his daughter, and she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. So Exodus chapter 2 covers like 40 years of Moses' early life like that, like real quick. So the tail end of that chapter is God hearing the groaning of the children of Israel. And then chapter 3 is the interaction that God has with Moses in the burning bush. That story, of course, is that Moses at this point is 80. He spends 40 years, so his first 40 years of his life are in Egypt as royalty. His second 40 years are essentially in the wilderness as a refuge. So he's 80 years old when God talks to him in the burning bush and tells him, you are going to Egypt. And so I can see why, as an 80-year-old, he was like, you got the wrong guy. Like, it isn't me. I can't speak well. Like, who's going to listen to me? And so God performs a couple of miracles there, turning his hand leprous, and then healing his hand, and basically telling him, Aaron is going to go with you. Aaron is 83, and also of the tribe of Levi. And so the two of them, Moses and Aaron, go to Egypt and go to confront Pharaoh. And that is Exodus chapter 4. Let's see. Verse 18. And Moses went and returned to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said unto him, Let me go, I pray thee, and return unto my brethren which are in Egypt, and see whether they be yet alive. And Jethro said to Moses, Go in peace. And the Lord said unto Moses and Midian, Go, return into Egypt, for all the men are dead which sought thy life. And Moses took his wife and his sons, and set them upon an ass, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God in his hand. And then for several chapters, actually, this is an interesting one. A quick side note. Because this is we don't often get what I would call white space, right? So it's just, so God said go, and Moses just hauls his family. I like to imagine that there would be a discussion between the husband and wife about what was happening. And that's what is captured here in chapter 4. I will read verses 24 and following. And it came to pass by the way in the inn that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. Then Zipporah took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at his feet and said, Surely a bloody husband art thou to me. So he let them go, and he said, A bloody husband thou art, because of the circumcision. Okay, so quick side note here. Circumcision as a commandment has been around since Abraham. So a Hebrew boy would be circumcised on the 8th day of his life. My Bible commentary gives a really interesting account of these 3 little verses here by saying that the journey was probably difficult enough that that Moses and Zipporah thought that God was trying to kill them in some capacity, because Midian, as we'll see from some maps, is it's a haul from Egypt, and would have been very difficult, especially with kids. And it's likely that these children were old enough that they had not been properly circumcised according to the Abrahamic tradition, which again would have been on the 8th day of the baby's life. The Egyptian tradition is when the child is a teenager, they would be circumcised. So Moses, growing up with the Egyptian traditions, may not have been circumcising his sons according to the covenant that he's about to go be a spokesman of. So there's a disconnect there a little bit. So Zipporah's response is to circumcise her son and basically cast that foreskin at Moses' feet and go, this is why we're struggling, because you were not following the covenant. Which I think is probably, I could see that being an interaction between the husband and wife. We are suffering, and it's because you are not showing up. We need to fix this. So, let's see. So Moses is on his way to Egypt. When he gets to Egypt, we see the 10 plagues. We're not going to go through these exhaustively, but the 10 plagues, there's a lot of layered symbolism in them. But suffice it to say, they crescendo in effect. Starts with the plague of blood. Are you all familiar with the 10 plagues? Okay. So Moses gets to Egypt. God tells Moses, look, Pharaoh's not going to let your people go. This is going to be drawn out a little bit. He will eventually let your people go, but not before it gets bad. And I'm going to kill his son. And then he'll let you go. And so this whole time, after every plague, Moses approaches Pharaoh and he says, the Lord has said, let my people go that they may worship me in the desert. And Pharaoh says, who is God that I should know him? I'm not going to do that. And so Moses takes his rod and he executes these plagues. And we'll read the first one because it's an interesting interaction. Let's see here. This is Exodus chapter 7. I'll start in verse 10. And Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh, and they did so as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers. Now the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner with their enchantments. For they cast down every man his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. And he hardened Pharaoh's heart, that he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. The scene is that the rod turns into a snake. The Egyptian magicians are able to do the same thing, but the rod of Moses and Aaron, or the rod of Aaron in this case, swallows up those other snakes. And God had told Moses and Aaron that after each of these successive trials with Pharaoh, I'm going to harden his heart. This is a very interesting turn of phrase and a very interesting thing for God to describe. But essentially, God is describing what Pharaoh's ego is going to do and how Pharaoh's ego is going to react. Every time Pharaoh is confronted with power that challenges his own, he doubles down. That's the mark of a true tyrant, is you double down even when you know you're wrong. And that is exactly what Pharaoh does. That's why he's an archetype. Like when you think of tyrant, you think of this Pharaoh. He's never given a name in Scripture. We think it might be Ahimotep II. Just for context, we're not entirely sure which Pharaoh it is. But some people say Ramses II, some people say Ahimotep II. I cannot say one way or another. But this is how the streak of the tyrant begins, as he starts to double down. So, verse 14, and the Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened, he refuses to let the people go. Get thee unto Pharaoh in the morning. Lo, he goeth out to the water, and thou shalt stand by the river's brink against he come, and the rod which was turned to a serpent shalt thou take in thy hand. And thou shalt say unto him, the Lord God of the Hebrews hath sent me unto thee, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. And behold, hitherto that thou wouldest not hear. Thus saith the Lord, in this thou shalt know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will smite with the rod that is in my hand upon the waters which are in the river, and they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that is in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Egyptians shall loathe to drink of the water of the river. And that's exactly what happens. Verse 19, the Lord said unto Moses, say unto Aaron, take thy rod, and stretch out thine hand upon the waters of Egypt, upon their streams, upon their rivers, and upon their ponds, and upon all the pools of water, that they may become blood. And that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. That's exactly what happens. Pharaoh, verse 23, and Pharaoh turned and went into his house, neither did he set his heart to this also. And all the Egyptians digged round about the river for water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the river. And 7 days were fulfilled. After that, the Lord had smitten the river. That didn't work. Next plague out of the gate is frogs, and it's that same cycle over and over again until eventually death. And every time Pharaoh's heart is hardened, he doubles down until eventually, right around here, even his advisors are like, let him go. Let them go. Don't you know that Egypt is destroyed? Because each of these successive plagues, like cattle death, for example, all of the Egyptian cattle died, but the cattle of the Hebrews did not die. So they're running out of food. The boils, the hail destroys things, and then the locust eats the rest of the food. So now there's no vegetation, there's no livestock, people are literally sick, buildings are destroyed. The ninth
He's
plague,
still refusing.
and he's still refusing. Yes, like that's why it's such an archetype, because no matter how bad it gets, he just refuses. He's Pharaoh. Who is God that I should know him? Well, the last plague is the plague And this is where we get the inspiration. So turn to Exodus chapter we're going to read a little bit of chapter 11, and then we'll read parts of chapter 12. So chapter 11, verse 1. And the Lord said unto Moses, Yet will I bring one plague more upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards he will let you go. When he shall let you go, he shall surely thrust you out hence altogether. Speak now in the ears of the people, and let every man borrow of his and every woman of her neighbor jewels of silver and of gold. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, and in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people. Verse 4. And Moses said, Thus saith the Lord, About midnight will I go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn of the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh that sitteth upon his throne, even unto the firstborn of the maidservant that is behind the mill, and all the firstborn of beasts. And there shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there was none like it, nor shall be like it anymore. I cannot imagine that. Every firstborn dies. So, chapter 12 is about how the Hebrews protect themselves during this period of time. So, verse 1 of chapter 12. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you a beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel. Shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house, a lamb for a house. And if the household be too little for the lamb, let next unto his house take it according to the number of souls. Every man according to his eating shall make your count for the lamb. On and describes how you're supposed to cook the lamb. You're supposed to roast it with bitter herbs, and the point of roasting it is to cook it quickly. They were to eat the Passover meal with their shoes. The idea being that this evening at midnight, they roast the lamb, they eat the lamb, they take the blood of the lamb. Verse 7, they shall take of the blood and strike it upon the two side posts and on the upper doorposts of the house wherein they eat it. So they cover the door with the blood of the lamb, they roast the lamb, they eat the lamb, shoes on, ready to go. Because when that cry rises in Egypt, it's time to get out right now. And that's exactly what happens. Verse 11 is, And thus shall you eat it, with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. The idea is that the Lord literally passed over the houses that were covered in the lamb's blood. I don't need to go to great length to pull in the imagery from that and the blood of Christ, the blood of the Lamb, doing the same for our souls. Like this imagery, the Christ imagery comes directly from the imagery here with Moses. The archetypes are like unmistakable. So, all the firstborn die. There's a great cry that goes out of Egypt, and Pharaoh's like, Get out yesterday, go. So they go, and the Egyptians give them gold. Like everyone's like, just please go, just get out. So the Hebrews walk out of Egypt, not only with like Pharaoh kicking them out, but also laden with the wealth of Egypt. So they're gone. So as we see, as Exodus progresses, Pharaoh doubles down one more time and says, I don't understand why we let these people go. So he pursues them with 600 chariots and pursues them to, let's see, where is it at? This is Exodus 14. Let's see. 14 verse 5, and it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people, and they said, why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? And he made ready his chariot and took his people with him, and took 600 chosen chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, and captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with a high hand. The children of Israel see this. They see the pursuit of the Egyptians, and they become afraid. And so Moses tells the children of Israel, and there are hundreds of thousands of children of Israel. So this is a massive, massive group of people that Moses is leading out of Egypt that are now being pursued by a military force. He has got to keep the peace. And he's like, don't worry, God's going to fight for you. And God's like, why are you crying to me? Tell them to go. Tell them to move forward. Keep going. That's verse 15. And the Lord said unto Moses, wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward. But lift up thou thy rod, and stretch out thine hand over the sea, and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground to the midst of the sea. What an amazing thing for God to tell you. Why are you crying to me for? Take your stick, divide the sea. Like, obviously that's the answer. And so, right. And so Moses does that. They get up to the brink of the Red Sea. They have been led by a cloud. And that cloud is so-called the angel of the Lord. And it removes itself from in front of the congregation to protect the rear of the congregation. So that is verse 19. And the angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. And it was a cloud and darkness to them, but it gave light by night to these, so that they came one not near the other all the night. Because an east wind blows all night and separates the Red Sea and dries the ground. So I can't imagine how windy that wind must have been, but over the course of the night, the angel of the Lord protects the children of Israel, sets up a barrier of darkness. The sea is parted, and in the morning they go to cross. Verse 24. And it came to pass that in the morning watch, the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily. So the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come up again upon the Egyptians, and upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it, and the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. And Israel saw the great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. That is quite an exit. Quite an exit. So, what happens after that?
You know, what's funny, what's really cool is like, now we have like all this cool technology and stuff, and archaeologists have found remains of chariots in the Red Sea.
Yep.
You know, so for people going, oh, this is just a story, this isn't real, there's actually evidence in the Red Sea of these chariots.
Yep, I have seen some pictures that look like wheels and spokes. Some archaeologists say it's just a coral formation. Other people are like, yeah, but it looks like chariot wheels. You know,
That's wheels.
yeah, it looks like wheels. Exactly. So after all this, what next? So now the children of Israel are freed from the Egyptians. What do? Well, they make their way through the wilderness, and they get into the land of Midian. We have a couple of maps that I'll go over, because there's two schools of thought, prevailing schools of thought. Okay. Egypt. This is school of thought number one. This all hinges on where is Mount Sinai. Because as Moses is leading the children of Israel out of Egypt, they are heading towards Mount Sinai, where God will give them the covenant. Okay? So, there is no official place that is so named Mount Sinai. However, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has set up a lot of security measures around a particular tract of land. And some people say, some archaeologists say that Mount Sinai is on the Sinai Peninsula, and that's what this is. This is the Sinai Peninsula. This would have been part of the Red Sea. This would have been part of the Red Sea. And so it's unknown if they crossed here. And this is where the Red Sea was parted, and then they continued down to Mount Sinai. Or they crossed here, and Mount Sinai is actually over here in the wilderness of Midian. I personally take this latter view because the government of Saudi Arabia has set up security guards and security measures around this little tract of land. And recently, there were a couple of research teams that managed to get approval to go check out these archaeological sites. There's about a 30-minute video on YouTube that I knew we wouldn't have time for, but it's fascinating because they find the Rock of Horeb. That's the rock that God instructs Moses. One of the big problems of wandering in the desert is water. The children of Israel get thirsty, and they start to cry unto Moses that they need water. And Moses is told by God to strike this rock, and from this rock, water will come out.
Well, doesn't he actually tell Moses to speak to the rock?
That would be the second rock.
Oh, okay.
There's two
Okay.
rocks. Yeah. So the first time he's told to strike the rock, that's the Rock of Horeb. The second rock, I can't remember the name of that rock, he is told to speak to the rock, and in his frustration, he strikes the rock. And as a result, that's in Numbers. As a result, God tells him, because you didn't listen to me, you are not allowed to go into the promised land.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see it, but you're not allowed to go into it. And that's how Moses dies. But this rock, the Rock of Horeb, he's told to smack. And he does that. And when he does that, the rock that they found is this huge, imposing rock. I mean, it just sticks out like a sore thumb on the landscape. And it is split right in two. And there's water erosion in front of the rock. So evidence would suggest that
Oh,
that
there's
is
no longer water coming out of it.
no, it's
Interesting.
dry as a bone. And that evidence would suggest that that would be the rock. If that wasn't enough, close to that site is the site of presumably where they made the golden calf. There's like a big outcropping of rock, and all over these rocks are pictographs of bulls, all over the place.
Mm.
And a giant, it almost looks like a pedestal that has a donut-shaped erosion pattern in it that was probably, I say probably, where the golden calf was ground into dust. Because Moses commands that they grind the cow into dust and they drink it.
And they try to get it.
Yeah. So part of the punishment. And nearby, like if I was standing where the golden calf is at, right, and like here's all the congregation. If I turn around, there is a mountain, and the tip of that mountain is black. Unlike any other peak around, this outline of the mountain is very obviously darkened. Which, when God touches down on Mount Sinai, we are told that the mountain smoked and quaked. That is Exodus chapter 19, verse 16. And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood on the neither part of the mount. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in a fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. What a scene! What a scene! So, I say all that to say that they haven't found that evidence here on the Sinai Peninsula. That evidence is over here in Saudi Arabia. So, evidence would suggest that they crossed the Red Sea here, not here, and that the Egyptians pursued them through the wilderness of Egypt, which we know as the Sinai Peninsula, and that they crossed here into the land of Midian, and that Mount Sinai, the Rock of Horeb, and all of these places are all clustered together right around here. There are fences guarding it, all this kinds of stuff, and it isn't publicized because, well, you could speculate endlessly why the government wouldn't want people to know that there are places of faith right there. But suffice it to say that to me is probably the most supportive piece of evidence, is that there's security here, but not over here
So is there still security today?
today. Yep, today.
So would that suggest then that the wandering in the desert was more in the desert of Saudi Arabia than of the other section?
You mean like over here?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, again, I cannot say with any, I'm not an archaeologist. I can't say, oh yeah, this is absolutely the path they took. It's up for debate. All I can say is that there is evidence that this is where Mount Sinai is at, and this is where the Rock of Horeb and so on is at, because there is physical evidence that seems to indicate that. How that impacts the story of wandering in the wilderness, which, of course, the Jews end up doing for 40 years. Moses' life is broken up into 3 sections of 40. You've heard me say it before. I will say it again. Anytime we see number play like that, that's God saying, pay attention. Pay attention.
What side of Jericho what side of the Jordan is Jericho on?
Jordan or Jericho should be on, let's see, it looks like it's on the west bank.
Okay, so that would support your theory then, because if they were wandering out here and came across there, they had to cross Jordan to get to Jericho,
Yeah.
which doesn't make sense if they're coming the other way because that's the same side.
Right.
So they would have to come this way to cross.
It would make sense. That's what the evidence would suggest.
Okay.
So, and if you think about it, if you're going to wander in the desert for 40 years, you could pretty well do it right there.
Mm.
It's desert. There's nothing there. So anyway, 2 lines of thinking. Some scholars say that it's this, and that Mount Sinai is somewhere down here. Some scholars say this, and that Mount Sinai is east of the Sinai Peninsula in the land of Midian. This whole journey is chronicled in the book of Exodus. And so the 10 Commandments are given in Exodus chapter 20. We see that basically Moses is on the mountain for, here's that number again, 40 days.
Yeah.
And over the period of that time, the children of Israel get bored, get concerned that their man isn't going to come down from the mountain that's on fire. And so Aaron makes the golden calf. Of course, God tells Moses what's going on. You need to get off the mountain because they've gone Looney Tunes. So Moses actually breaks the first 2 tables of the testimony. He throws them on the ground and they are broken. God basically says, look, I don't want to hang out anymore. These people are, I'm ad-libbing and giving the Justin spiel on it. But basically God's like, I'm not going to do this anymore. Moses has to intercede and say, don't destroy the children of Israel. Remember your covenant. God says, you're right. And there's a lot of Moses as the intercessor between God and the children of Israel repeatedly. Again, that Savior archetype, the story of Christ, is essentially the bloomed and blossomed version of the story of Moses, because the same things are happening. So we will not go through these in depth, because a lot of Exodus is God instructing them on how to make the menorah, how to make the tabernacle, how to make your clothes, how to do this, laying out the law, which we talked about a couple weeks ago. Very extensive. So,
I like where Moses had to chisel out the tablets again by himself.
yeah, God eventually, when they go to renew the covenant, God tells them, make yourself ready in the morning, because you're going to come back up to the mountain and bring 2 tables of stone. And so, how he hewed 2 tables of stone in an afternoon to be ready to hike a mountain at 80 years old the next morning
You're right.
is by the grace of God alone. And so, over the next 40 years, there is a series of adventures that the Jews go on. These verses are all, let's call them high points along those journeys, or along that journey. Manna, if you'll recall the story of the manna and the quail, God sending a bunch of quail. There's the water from the rock. That's the rock of Horeb I was talking about. The appointment of judges is essentially Moses' way of establishing hierarchy. He had been solving all of the Jews' problems. So every problem they have, they would come to Moses and expect him to fix it. And it was too much for one man. So he actually sets up a structure of reporting and judgment so that the community can sort out their disagreements. Because it was true then, and it is true today, that the number one problem in any community is conflict resolution. It's very difficult. So,
Yeah, can you imagine 3 foot of quail
Yeah.
across the whole camp? You
Yeah.
would be
would
sloshing around in guts and blood by the time you ate your way out.
it would sink. And then by the time we get into the book of Exodus begins the chronicle of the journey and the receiving of the commandments and the beginning of the 40-year period. The book of Leviticus, of course, is like the meat and potatoes of the law. The book of Numbers continues that 40-year journey. And if you'll remember, by the time we get to Deuteronomy being the second iteration of the law, everybody that had left Egypt has died by the time they get to the banks of the Jordan River and are preparing to cross into Canaan. And only Moses, Joshua, and Caleb remain of the original generation. So the book of Deuteronomy is Moses's final days. He has several speeches throughout the book of Deuteronomy, and he spends his last days telling the new generation, don't mess this up.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what happened, and he recounts the story. Don't do that. Here's what you need to do. Here are some songs to remind you of how to do it. And there are a couple of songs in Deuteronomy that, when we think song, 3.5 minute, Billboard hit, it isn't that. It's very long, drawn out prose. Again, Moses was not allowed to enter the land of Canaan. Numbers chapter 20 talks about his instruction to speak to the rock. He does not. Hits the rock. He hits the rock. Excuse me. This is Numbers chapter 20, verse 7. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Take the rod, and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak unto the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth this water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock. So thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts drink. And the Lord took the rod from before, and Moses took the rod from before the Lord, as he commanded him. Verse 11, and Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice. And the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beasts also. And the Lord spake unto Moses, Because ye believe me not, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them.
Interesting.
And
He
so
had to hit it twice.
he hit it twice.
The
Yeah.
first time it didn't work. He had to hit it a second time.
Yeah, well, and we talked earlier about the doubling down of the tyrant, and I think that is exactly why God said, okay, since you didn't understand the lesson, you do not get to go into the land of Canaan, because he doubled down when he hit the rock, and then he did it again, and so in so doing became essentially a tyrant of manner of speaking. Because he exhibited the same qualities that Pharaoh had exhibited earlier. That even though he was wrong, he doubled down. And therein lies the sin. So the end of the book of Deuteronomy talks about how Joshua is appointed the next leader. He is the one that leads them across the Jordan rivers. Moses dies at 120 years old. He does get to see the land of Canaan. God takes him up into a mountain and he sees it, and he dies. He's 120 years old and is mourned for 30 days. Now, that is a lot of life to cover in a very short amount of time. And so if you really want to know the story of Moses, then intimately read the book of Exodus. But we see, like I said, the Savior archetype. Moses is saved from a tyrant's decree to kill male children. Christ is saved from a tyrant's decree to kill all male children. Christ accomplishes that by, of course, going into Egypt. He ends up in Egypt because Joseph, his father, takes him to Egypt, just as Joseph took his father into Egypt way back when. So you see all these synchronicities that are not accidents. Of course, Moses is the deliverer from physical bondage. Christ is spiritual. They're both mediators. There's the giver of the law. There's the fulfiller of the law. Israel, the intercessor for spiritual Israel. So Moses mentions in Deuteronomy chapter 18, and I've included that verse on this, that God would raise up a prophet. Acts tells us that verse or that prophecy about the prophet is referring to Christ, the prophet. And Stephen, before he is stoned, says the same thing in Acts chapter 7. And if we have, do I have a little more time to read? What are we at?
10:21.
All right, we can stop. So anyway, any questions over Moses? Those are definitely the high points. Cool. Well, thanks for letting me run a little bit over. Appreciate that. And for surprising you all with Bible class this morning. Surprise. No, okay, so I will not be able to teach again until the first weekend in August. So it'll be, basically, I'll be gone for most of July.
We will not be doing church on 4th of July weekend, which is this coming weekend.
That makes sense.
What? I'm gonna have to miss out on church?
You don't have to. You've got a couple options. You can preach to yourself, or you could find a church that.
I always preach to myself anyways.
Okay, you're not missing out.